Hello, my dear students and the rest of the learners. Welcome to this presentation in which we are going to continue with our discussions on the topic file management in operating systems. This is the last part of a 6-part series of presentations on this topic. The title of this presentation is on file protection and security. My name is MemJM, or you can simply call me Emily Swap. In this presentation, we are going to look at the meaning and importance of file protection and security, the security design principles, the computer security threats, the security mechanism tools, access control verification, audit trail. Let's commence by looking at the meaning and importance of file security and protection. When information is stored in a computer system, we want to keep it safe from physical damage, that is, reliability, and improper access, that is, protection. Reliability is generally provided by duplicate copies of files. Many computers have system programs that automatically or through computer operator intervention copy disk files to tape at regular intervals, for example, once per day or week or month, to maintain a copy should a file system be accidentally destroyed. File systems can be damaged by hardware problems, such as errors in reading or writing, the power surges or failures, head crashes, dirt, temperature extremes, and vandalism. Files may be deleted accidentally too. The bugs in the file system software can also cause file contents to be lost. File systems contain highly valuable information. Protecting this information against unauthorized usage is a major concern for file systems. Security and protection are usually used interchangeably, but in this context, we use the term security to refer to the overall problem and protection mechanisms that are used to refer to the specific operating system mechanisms used to safeguard information in the computer. Computer security, on the other hand, are the techniques for computing in the presence of adversaries. Security refers to providing a protection system to computer system resources such as the central processing unit, memory, disk, software programs, and most importantly, data and or information that is stored in the computer system. If a computer program is run by an authorized user, then he or she may cause severe damage to computer or data that is stored in it. So, a computer system must be protected against unauthorized access, malicious access to system memory, viruses, worms, amongst others. In some systems, protection is enforced by a program that is called a reference monitor. Every time an access to a potentially protected resource is attempted, the system first asks the reference monitor to check its legality. The reference monitor then looks at its policy tables and makes a decision. A computer system contains many objects that need to be protected. These objects can be hardware, for example, the central processing units, memory segments, disk drives, or printers, or they can be software, for example, processes, files, databases, or semaphores. Each object has a unique name by which it is referenced and a finite set of operations that the processes are allowed to carry out on it. It is obvious that a way is needed to prohibit processes from accessing objects that they are not authorized to access. A domain is a set of objects or rights pairs. Each pair specifies an object and some subset of the operations that can be performed on it. A right means permission to perform one of the operations. Often, a domain corresponds to a single user telling what the user can do and not do, but a domain can also be more general than just one user. At every instant of time, each process runs in some protection domain. In other words, there is some collection of objects it can access, and for each object, it has some set of rights. Processes can also switch from domain to domain during execution. The rules for domain switching are highly system dependent. From a security perspective, computer systems have three general goals with the corresponding threats to them. These are, number one, data confidentiality. It is concerned with having secret data remain secret. More specifically, if the owner of some data has decided that these data are only to be made available to certain people and not others, the system should guarantee that release of the data to unauthorized people does not occur. As a bare minimum, the owner should be able to specify who can see what, and the system should enforce these specifications, which ideally should be per file. Number two is data integrity. This means that unauthorized users should not be able to modify any data without the owner's permission. Data modification in this context includes not only changing the data, but also removing data and adding false data as well. If a system cannot guarantee that data deposited in it remain unchanged until the owner decides to change them, it is not worth much as such information or as an information system. Integrity is usually more important than confidentiality. Number three is system availability. This means that nobody can disturb the system to make it unusable. It is preventing denial of service attacks. Therefore, computer protection and security mechanisms provided by an operating system must address the following requirements. Number one is confidentiality or privacy. This is the requirement that information maintained by a computer system be accessible only by authorized parties. that is, users and the processes that run as or represent those users. Interception occurs when an authorized party gains access to a resource, examples including illicit file copying and the invocation of programs. Number 2 is integrity. This is the requirement that a computer system's resources can be modified only by authorized parties. Modification occurs when an authorized party not only gains access to, but changes a resource such as data or the execution of a running process. Number 3 is availability. This is the requirement that a computer system be accessible at the required times by authorized parties. Interruption occurs when an authorized party reduces the availability of or to a resource. Number 3 is authenticity. This is the requirement that a computer system can verify the identity of fabrication occurs when an unauthorized party inserts counterfeit data amongst valid data. The following are therefore the key principles that can be used as a guide to designing secure systems. That is what we refer to as security design principles. Number 1 is open design. An operating system's security should not remain secret nor be provided by stealth. Open mechanisms are subject to scrutiny, review, and continued refinement. The system design should therefore be public. Assuming that the intruder will not know how the system works serves only to delude the designers. Number 2, the default should be no access. Errors in which legitimate access is refused will be reported much faster than errors in which unauthorized access is allowed. Number 3 is check for current authority. The system should not check for permission, determine that access is permitted, and then squirrel away this information for subsequent use. This information for subsequent use is vital. Many systems check for permission when a file is opened and not afterwards. This means that a user who opens a file and keeps it open for weeks will continue to have access even if the owner has long since changed the file protection. Therefore, security mechanisms must be pervasive and access control checked during all operations, including the task or the tasks of backup and maintenance. Number 4 is least privilege. Every object, that is users and their processes, should work within a minimal set of privileges. Access rights should be obtained by explicit request, and the default level of access should be none. Therefore, each process can be given the least privilege possible. This principle implies a fine-grained protection scheme. Number 5, the protection mechanism should be simple, uniform, and built into the lowest layers of the system. Trying to retrofit security to an existing insecure system is nearly impossible. Security, just like correctness, is not an add-on feature. Therefore, security mechanisms should be as small and simple as possible, ending in their verification. This implies that they should be integral to an operating system's design and not an afterthought. That is what we refer to as economy of mechanisms. Number 6, the scheme chosen must be psychologically acceptable. Therefore, security mechanisms must at the same time be robust yet non-intrusive. An intrusive mechanism is likely to be counterproductive and avoided by users if possible. The operating system can allow users to protect their resources. A system is secure if its resources are used and accessed as intended under all circumstances. Unfortunately, it is not generally possible to achieve total security. Security violations of the system can be categorized as being either intentional, that is malicious, or accidental. Among the forms of malicious access include the following. Number 1 is unauthorized reading of data, which we also refer to as theft of information. Number 2 is unauthorized modification of data. Number 3 is authorized destruction of data. There are 4 levels at which a system must be protected. Number 1 is physical. The site or sites containing the computer systems must be physically secured against the armed or surreptitious entry by intruders. Both the machine rooms and the terminals or workstations that have access to the machines must be secured. Number 2 is human level. Authorizing users must be done carefully to assure that only appropriate users have access to the system. Even authorized users, however, may be encouraged to let others use their access for some reasons, for example, by being bribed. They must or they may also be tricked into allowing access via social engineering. One type of social engineering attack is referred to as phishing. Here, a legitimate looking email or web page misleads a user into entering confidential information. Another technique is dumpster diving, which is a general term for attempting to gather information in order to gain unauthorized access to the computer by looking through trash, finding phone books, or finding notes containing passwords, for example. These security problems are management and personnel issues and not the problems pertaining to operating systems. Number 3 is operating system. The system must protect itself from accidental or purposeful security breaches. A runaway process could constitute an accidental denial of service attack. A query to a service could reveal passwords. A Stack Overflow could allow the launching of an unauthorized process. The list of possible breaches is almost endless. Number 4 is network. As network communications become ever more important and pervasive in modern computing environments, it becomes ever more important to protect this area of the system. This is by protecting the network itself from attack and protecting the local system from attacks coming in through the network. This is a growing area of concern as wireless communications and portable devices become more and more prevalent. Much computer data in modern systems travels over private leased lines, shared lines like the internet, wireless connections, or dial-up lines. Intercepting this data could be just as harmful as breaking into a computer, and interruption of communications could constitute remote or a remote denial of service attack, diminishing users' use of the system and trust in the system. Security at the first two levels must be maintained if operating system security is to be ensured. A weakness at a high level of security, that is physical or human, allows circumvention of strict low-level, that is operating system security measures. Thus, the old adage that a chain is as weak as its weakest link is especially true of system security. All of these aspects must be addressed for security to be maintained. The security of a system can be improved by two management techniques. Number 1 is threat monitoring. In this case, the system can check for suspicious patterns of activity in an attempt to detect a security violation. Number 2 is audit log. An audit log simply records the time, the user, and the type of all accesses to an object. Networked computers are much more susceptible to security attacks than are stand-alone systems. There are 4 computer security classifications in computer systems. These are Class A, Class B, Class C, and Class D. This is when they used specifications to determine and model the security of systems and of security solutions. Following is a brief description of each classification. Number 1, Type A. This is usually the highest level. It uses formal design specifications and verification techniques. It grants a high degree of assurance of process security. Type B. In this classification, we have provision of mandatory protection. Therefore, Type B provides mandatory protection system. Here, we have all the properties of a class C2 system. It attaches a sensitivity label to each object, and it is of 3 types. These are type B1. This maintains the security label of each object in the system. This label is used for making decisions to access control. The second one is B2. This extends the sensitivity labels to each system resource, such as storage objects, supports covert channels, and auditing of events. The other one is B3. It allows creating lists or user groups for access control to grant access or revoke access to a given named object. Number 3, we have type C. This provides protection and user accountability using audit capabilities. This type C is of 2 types. The first one is type C1. This type incorporates controls so that users can protect their private information and keep other users from accidentally reading or deleting their data. Unix operating system versions are mostly under the C1 class. Then we have C2. This adds an individual level access control to the capabilities of a C1 level system. Number 4 is type D. This is usually the lowest level. It offers minimum protection. Examples is those protection levels found in Microsoft Disk Operating System, that one which was found in Windows 3.1, amongst such other operating systems. 2 important issues in security are data loss and intruders, and these are normally supposed to be the concerns of data protection and security. What is data loss? The causes of data loss include: number 1, natural disasters. This includes earthquakes, floods, fire, wars, riots, amongst others. Number 2 is hardware and software errors. These include the central processing unit malfunctions, unreadable disks or tapes, telecommunication, and program bugs. Number 3 is human errors. These entail incorrect data entry, wrong tape or disk mounted, wrong program run, lost tape, among such similar errors. And what are the intruders, or what is intruding? Most of these can be dealt with by maintaining adequate backups far from the original data. Intruders come in 2 forms: the passive intruders who just want to read the files they are not authorized to read, and active intruders who would want to make unauthorized changes to data. Different systems have different security requirements, and it is important when designing a system that you know the possible threats so as to put proper measures to counter them. Another aspect of security is privacy. Privacy is protecting individuals from misuse of information about them. Let's now look at the program threads. The operating system's processes and the kernel do the designated task as instructed. If a user program made this process to malicious tasks, then it is known as a program thread. Therefore, these threads attack specific programs or are carried and distributed in programs. Therefore, these threads attack specific programs or are carried and distributed in programs. The following are the main security flaws, or what we call common program threads. Number one is the Trojan horse. This is a program that secretly performs some maliciousness in addition to its visible actions. This is a seemingly innocent program that is widely distributed and performs some unexpected and undesirable function such as stealing data and emailing it to some distant site where it can be used later. A Trojan horse is a useful or apparently useful program that contains hidden code to perform some unwanted or harmful function. Such program traps user login credentials and stores them to send to malicious user who can later on log to computer and can access system resources. Some Trojan horses are deliberately written as such, and others are the result of legitimate programs that have become infected with viruses. Another classic Trojan horse is a login emulator, which records a user's account name and password, issues a password incorrect message, and then logs off the system. The user then tries again with a proper login prompt, logs in successfully, and doesn't realize that their information has been stolen. Two solutions to Trojan horses are to have the system print usage statistics on logouts and to require the typing of non-trappable key sequences such as Control-Alt-Delete in order to log in. This is why modern Windows systems require the Control-Alt-Delete sequence to commence logging in, which cannot be emulated or caught by ordinary programs. That is, that key sequence always transfers control over to the operating system. Spyware is a version of a Trojan horse that is often included in free software downloaded off the internet. Spyware programs generate pop-up browser windows and may also emulate information about the user and deliver it to some central site. This is an example of covert channels in which surreptitious communications occur. Another common task of spyware is to send out spam email messages, which then purportedly come from the infected user. Number two is trapdoor. This is a program which is designed to work as required but has a security hole in its code that performs illegal action without knowledge of the user. Therefore, a trapdoor is when a designer or a programmer or hacker deliberately inserts a security hole that they can use later to access the system. A trapdoor is a secret entry point into a program, often left by the program's developers or sometimes delivered via a software update. A zombie is an independent program that secretly takes over a system and uses that system to launch attacks on other systems, thus concealing the original investigator. Such attacks often involve further replication of the zombie itself. Zombies are often used in denial of service attacks. Because of the possibility of trapdoors, once a system has been in an untrustworthy state, that system can never be trusted again. Even the backup tapes may contain a copy of some cleverly hidden backdoor. A clever trapdoor could be inserted into a compiler so that any programs compiled with that compiler could contain a security hole. This is especially dangerous because inspection of the code being compiled would not reveal any problems. Number 3 is logic bomb. This is a piece of malicious code written by a company employee, probably a programmer, and secretly inserted into the system. It's a situation when a program misbehaves only when certain conditions met. Otherwise, it works as a genuine program. I repeat, the logic bomb is a piece of malicious code that has been written by a company employee and especially a programmer and secretly inserted into the system. It is a situation when a program misbehaves only when certain conditions are met. Otherwise, it works as a genuine program. This is normally harder to detect. A logic bomb is a code that has been embedded in a program that explodes when certain conditions are met. For example, a certain date or the presence of certain files or users. Logic bombs also often originate with the developers of the software. It is not designed to cause havoc all the time, but only when a certain set of circumstances occurs, such as when a particular date or time is reached, or some other noticeable event. Therefore, the going off of the logic bomb is triggered by a certain event in the system. Going off might involve clearing of the hard disk, erasing files at random, carefully making hard to detect changes to key programs, or encrypting essential files. A classic example is the dead man switch, which is designed to check whether a certain person, for example, the author, is logging in every day, and if they don't log in for a long time, presumably because they have been fired, then the logic bomb goes off and either opens up security holes or causes other problems. Number 2 is stack and buffer overflow. This is a classic method of attack which exploits bugs in system code that allows buffers to overflow. Unfortunately, famous attacks or famous hacks such as the buffer overflow attack are well published and well known, and it doesn't take a lot of skill to follow the instructions and start attacking lots of systems until the law of averages eventually works out. Script kiddies are those hackers with only rudimentary skills of their own, but the ability to copy the efforts of others. Number 3 are viruses. A virus is a program fragment of code embedded or attached to a legitimate program with the intention of infecting other programs by replicating itself and eventually wreaking havoc. A virus is a program that can infect other programs by modification, as well as causing local damage. Such modification includes a copy of the virus, which can then spread further to other programs. A virus can replicate themselves, or viruses can replicate themselves on a computer system. They are highly dangerous and can modify or delete user files or even crash the system. A virus is generally a small code embedded in a program. As user accesses the program, the virus starts getting embedded in other files or programs and can make system unusable for the user. Viruses are relevant to systems in a virus dropper, usually some form of a Trojan horse, and usually via email or unsafe downloads. Viruses take many forms, such as 1. File virus. A file virus attaches itself to an executable file, causing it to run the virus code first and then jump to the start of the original program. These viruses are termed as parasitic because they do not leave any new files on the system and the original program is still fully functional. Number 2 are the boot viruses or a boot virus. A boot virus occupies the boot sector and runs before the operating system is loaded. These are also known as memory viruses because in operation they reside in memory and do not disappear in the file system. Number 3 is macro virus. These viruses exist as a macro or a script that are run automatically by certain macro-capable programs such as Microsoft Word or Excel. These viruses can exist in word processing documents or spreadsheet files. Number 4 is source code viruses, which look for source code and infect it in order to spread. Number 5 are the polymorphic viruses, which change every time that they spread. This is not their underlying functionality, but just their signature by which virus checkers recognize them. Number 6 are the encrypted viruses, which travel in encrypted form to escape detection. In practice, these viruses are self-decrypting, which then allows them to infect other files. Number 7 are what we call the stealth viruses. These are the viruses which try to avoid detection by modifying parts of the system that could be used to detect them. For example, the read function system call could be modified so that if an infected file is read, the infected part gets skipped and the reader will receive the original unadulterated file or file. Number 8 are the tunneling viruses. The tunneling viruses attempt to avoid detection by inserting themselves into the interrupt handler chain or into device drivers. Number 9 is what we call the multipartite viruses. These are the viruses that attack multiple parts of the system, such as files, boot sector, and memory. Number 10 are what we call the armored viruses. These are viruses that are coded to make them hard for antivirus researchers to decode and understand. In addition, many files associated with viruses are hidden, protected, or given innocuous looking names such as ... That is ... Modern antivirus programs are basically signature-based detection systems, which also have the ability, in some cases, of disinfecting the affected files and returning them back to their original condition. Some virus detectors will run suspicious programs in a sandbox, an isolated and secure area of the system which mimics the real system. Non-safe programs, for example, right after a fresh install or after a thorough examination, can be digitally signed, and periodically the files can be re-verified against the stored digital signatures, which should be kept secure, such as on offline write-only medium. Let us now look at what we call the system and network threats. This refers to misuse of system services and network connections to put user in trouble. System threats can be used to launch program threats on a complete network called or known as program attack. System threats create such an environment that the operating system resources or user files are misused. The following are the main threats that affect the operating system or network itself or leverage those systems to launch attacks. Number 1 are worms or worms. Computer worms are reproducing programs that run independently and travel across network connections. It is a process that makes copies of itself in order to wreak havoc on a system. Worms consume system resources, often blocking out other legitimate processes. Worms that propagate over networks can be specifically problematic, as they can tie up vast amounts of network resources and bring down large-scale systems. A worm is an independent program that spreads via network connections, typically using either email, remote execution, or remote login to deliver or execute a copy of itself to or on another system, as well as causing local damage. A worm is a process which can be choked down or which can choke down a system performance by using system resources to extreme levels. A worm process generates its multiple copies where each copy uses system resources, prevents all other processes to get the required resources. Worms processes or worm processes can even shut down an entire network. The main difference between viruses and worms is the method in which they reproduce and spread. The difference between a worm and a virus is that a virus is a program segment, while a worm is a complete program. Viruses and worms both attempt to spread themselves, and both can do severe damage. Number two, we have what we call port scanning. This is a mechanism or a means by which a hacker can detect system vulnerabilities to make an attack on the system. It is technically not an attack, but rather a search for vulnerabilities to attack. The basic idea is to systematically attempt to connect to every known or common or possible network port on some remote machine and to attempt to make a contact. Once it is determined that a particular computer is listening to a particular port, then the next step is to determine what daemon is listening and whether or not it is a version containing a known security flaw that can be exploited. Because port scanning is easily detected and traced, it is usually launched from zombie systems, that is, previously hacked systems that are being used without the knowledge or permission of their rightful owner. For this reason, it is important to protect innocuous systems and accounts as well as those that contain sensitive information or special privileges. There are also port scanners available that administrators can use to check their own systems, which report any weaknesses found, but which do not exploit the weaknesses or cause any problems. Number three is denial of service or DOS. Its attacks do not attempt to actually access or damage systems, but merely to clog them up so badly that they cannot be used for any useful work. Tight loops that repeatedly request system services are an obvious form of this attack. Denial of service attacks normally prevent user to make legitimate use of the system. For example, a user may not be able to use internet if denial of service attacks browser's content settings. I repeat, denial of service attacks normally prevents user to make legitimate use of the system. For example, a user may not be able to use internet if service or if denial of service attacks the browser's content settings. Denial of service attacks can also involve social engineering, such as the internet chain letters that say, send this immediately to 10 of your friends, and then go to a certain universal resource locator or URL, which clogs up not only the internet mail system, but also the web server to which everyone is directed. Security systems that lock accounts after a certain number of failed login attempts are subject to denial of service attacks, which repeatedly attempt logins to all accounts with invalid passwords strictly in order to lock up all accounts. Sometimes, denial of service is not the result of deliberate maliciousness. The following are some of the most common types of violations to data or information. These are Number one is breach of confidentiality. Theft or theft of private or confidential information, such as credit card numbers, trade secrets, patents, secret formulas, manufacturing procedures, medical information, financial information, amongst the others, is referred to as breach of confidentiality. And therefore, the breach of confidentiality refers to the theft of private or confidential information. Number two is breach of integrity. This refers to unauthorized modification of data which may have serious indirect consequences. For example, a popular game or other program's source code could be modified to open up secure or security holes on user systems before being released to the public. Number three is breach of availability. This refers to unauthorized destruction of data, often just for the fun of causing havoc and for bragging rights. Vandalism of websites is a common form of this violation. Number four is theft of service. Unauthorized use, or this refers to unauthorized use of resources such as theft of CPU cycles, installation of daemons running on unauthorized file server, or tapping into the target's telephone or networking services. Number five is denial of service, DOS. This entails preventing legitimate users from using the system, often by overloading and overwhelming the system with an excess of requests for service. One common attack is masquerading, in which the attacker pretends to be a trusted third party. A variation of this is the man in the middle, in which the attacker masquerades as both the ends of the conversation to two targets. A replay attack involves repeating a valid transmission. Sometimes this can be the entire attack, such as repeating a request for a money transfer, or other times the content of the original message is replicated with malicious content. There are four types of security threats to consider. These are: number one, interception. Number two, interruption. Number three, modification. Number four, fabrication. Interception refers to the situation that an authorized party has gained access to a service or data. A typical example of interception is where communication between two parties has been overheard by someone else. Interception also happens when data are illegally copied. For example, after breaking into a person's private directory in a file system. Number two is interruption. Interruption refers to the situation in which services or data become unavailable, unusable, destroyed, and so on. In this sense, denial of service attacks, by which someone maliciously attempts to make a service inaccessible to other parties, is a security threat that classifies as interruption. An example of interruption is when a file is corrupted or lost. Number three is modification. Modifications involve unauthorized changing of data or tampering with a service so that it no longer adheres to its original specifications. Examples of modifications include intercepting and subsequently changing transmitted data, tampering with database entries, and changing a program so that it secretly logs the activities of its user. Number 4 is fabrication. This refers to the situation in which additional data or activity are generated that would normally not exist. For example, an intruder may attempt to add an entry into a password file or database. Likewise, it is sometimes possible to break into a system by replying previously sent messages. Note that interruption, modification, and fabrication can each be seen as a form of data falsification. Simply stating that a system should be able to protect itself against all possible security threats is not the way to actually build a secure system. What is first needed is a description of security requirements, that is, a security policy. A security policy describes precisely which actions the entities in a system are allowed to take and which ones are prohibited. Entities include users, services, data, machines, and so on. Once a security policy has been laid down, it becomes possible to concentrate on the security mechanisms by which a policy can be enforced. A security policy should be well thought out, agreed upon, and contained in a living document that everyone adheres to and is updated as needed. It is important to periodically examine the system to detect vulnerabilities, which entails: number 1, port scanning. Number 2, checking for bad passwords. Number 3, looking for swed programs. Number 4, unauthorized programs in system directories. Number 5, incorrect permission bit set. Number 6, program checksums or digital signatures which have changed. Number 7, unexpected or hidden network daemons. Number 8, new entries in startup scripts, shutdown scripts, cron tables, or other system scripts or configuration files. Number 9, new unauthorized accounts. Some administrators advocate security through obscurity, aiming to keep as much information about their systems hidden as possible and not announcing any security concerns that they come across. Others announce security concerns from the rooftops under the theory that hackers are going to find out anyway, and the only one kept in the dark by obscurity are honest administrators who need to get the want. I repeat, others announce security concerns from the rooftops under the theory that the hackers are going to find out anyway, and the only way one can be kept in the dark by obscurity is by having honest administrators who need to get the want. Intrusion detection attempts to detect attacks, both successful and unsuccessful attempts. Different techniques vary along several axes. Number 1, the time that detection occurs, either during the attack or after the fact. Number 2, the types of information examined to detect the attack or attacks. Some attacks can only be detected by analyzing multiple sources of information. Number 3, the response to the attack, which may range from alerting an administrator to automatically stopping the attack. For example, killing an offending process, to tracing back the attack in order to identify the attacker. Another approach is to divert the attack or the attacker to a honeypot on a honeynet. The idea behind the honeypot is a computer running normal services, but with no one uses to do any real work. I repeat, another approach is to divert the attacker to a honeypot on a honeynet. The idea behind a honeypot is a computer running normal services, but with no one using, but which no one uses to do any real work. The idea behind a honeypot is a computer running normal services, but which no one uses to do any real work. Such a system should not see any network traffic under normal conditions, so any traffic going to or from such a system is by definition suspicious. Honeypots are normally kept on a honeynet protected by a reverse firewall, which will let potential attackers into the honeypot, but will not allow any outgoing traffic. So that if the honeypot is compromised, the attacker cannot use it as a base of operations for attacking other systems. Honeypots are closely watched and any suspicious activity carefully logged and investigated. Intrusion detection systems, IDSs, raise the alarm when they detect an intrusion. Intrusion detection and prevention systems, IDPS, act as filtering routers, shutting down suspicious traffic when it is detected. There are two major approaches to detecting problems. Number 1 is signature-based detection, scans network packets, system files, etc., looking for recognizable characteristics of known attacks such as text strings for messages or the binary code for exec/bin/sh. The problem with this is that it can only detect previously encountered problems for which the signature is known, requiring the frequent update of signature lists. Number 2 is anomaly detection, which looks for unusual patterns of traffic or operation, such as unusually heavy load or an unusual number of logins late at night. The benefit of this approach is that it can detect the previously unknown attacks, so-called zero-day attacks. One problem with this method is characterizing what is normal for a given system. One approach is to benchmark the system, but if the attacker is already present when the benchmarks are made, then the unusual activity is recorded as the norm. Another problem is that not all changes in the system performance are the result of security attacks. If, for example, the system is bogged down and is really slow at a certain time, that does not mean that a hacker has gotten in and is using the system. To be effective, anomaly detectors must have a very low false alarm or what we call false positive rate, lest the warnings get ignored, as well as a low false negative rate in which attacks are missed. Let us now look at what we call security mechanisms or tools. Important security mechanisms or tools are: number one, encryption. Number two is authentication. Number three, authorization. Number four, auditing. Number five is firewalling. Let's commence by looking at encryption. Encryption transforms data into something an attacker cannot understand. In other words, encryption provides a means to implement confidentiality. In addition, encryption allows us to check whether data has been modified. It thus also provides support for integrity checks. The basic idea of encryption is to encode a message so that only the desired recipient can decode and read it. There are various types of encryption. One of them is symmetric encryption. With the symmetric encryption, the same key is used for both encryption and decryption and must be safely guarded. Number two is asymmetric encryption. With asymmetric encryption, the decryption key, KD, is not the same as the encryption key, that is KE, and more importantly, cannot be derived from it, which means the encryption key can be made publicly available and only the decryption key needs to be kept secret, or vice versa, depending on the application. Note that asymmetric encryption is much more computationally expensive than symmetric encryption, and as such, it is not normally used for large transmissions. Asymmetric encryption is suitable for small messages, authentication, and key distribution as covered in the following sections. Number two is authentication. This is the process of identifying a responsible party or a principal or claim the identity of a user, server, and so on behind each actions. It refers to identifying each user of the system and associating the executing programs with those users. It is the responsibility of the operating system to create a protection system which ensures that a user who is running a particular program is authentic. Identification describes a method of ensuring that a subject is the entity it claims to be. For example, a username or an account number. Identification and authentication, abbreviated as I&A, is the process of verifying that an identity is bound to be the entity that makes an assertion or claim of identity. The I&A process assumes that there was an initial validation of the identity, commonly called identity proofing. Various methods of identity proving are available, ranging from in-person validation using government-issued identification to anonymous methods that allow the claimant to remain anonymous but known to the system if they return. The method used for identity proofing and validation should provide an assurance level commensurate with the intended use of the identity within the system. Subsequently, the entity asserts an identity together with an authenticator as a means for validation. The only requirements for the identifier is that it must be unique within its security domain. In the case of clients, the basic premise is that before a service will do work for a client, the service must learn the client's identity. Typically, users are authenticated by means of passwords, but there are many other ways to authenticate the clients. After a client has been authenticated, it is necessary to check whether that client is authorized to perform the action requested. Access to records in a Mendecon database is a typical example. Depending on who accesses the database, permission may be granted to read the records, to modify certain fields in a record, or to add or remove a record. Therefore, every secured computer system must require all users to be authenticated at login time. After all, if the operating system cannot be sure who the user is, it cannot know which files and other resources he or she can access. Having determined that authentication is often important, the next step is to find a good way to achieve it. Most methods of authenticating users when they attempt to log in are based on at least one of the following 4 general principles or factors. Number 1 is something the user knows, such as password or a personal identification number, PIN. This assumes that only the owner of the account knows the password or personal identification number needed to access the account. Number 2 is something that the user has, such as smart card or security token. This assumes that only the owner of the account has the necessary smart card or token needed to unlock the account. Number 3 is something that the user is, such as fingerprint, voice, retina, or iris characteristics. Number 4 is where the user is. For example, inside or outside a company firewall, or proximity of login location to a personal GPS device. For a strong identification or authentication to be in process, it must include at least 2 out of the 4 authentication factors or authentication factors that we have looked at, also referred to as two-factor authentication. When issuing identification values to users or subjects, ensure that, number 1, each value should be unique for user accountability. Number 2, a standard naming scheme should be followed. Number 3, the values should be non-descriptive of the user's possession or task. Number 4, the values should not be shared between the users. The following are the key authentication methods that can be used. Number 1 is the use of biometrics. This is an authentication method which verifies an individual's identity by analyzing a unique personal attribute or behavior. It is the most effective and accurate method for verifying identification. It is the most expensive authentication mechanism. The following are the main types of biometric systems that can be used. Number 1 is fingerprint. These are based on the ridge endings. bifurcation exhibited by the friction edges and some minutiae of the finger. Number 2 is palm scan. These are based on the creases, ridges, and grooves that are unique in each individual's palm. Number 3 is hand geometry. These are based on the shape, that is length and width, of a person's hand and fingers. Number 4 is retina scan. This is based on the blood vessel pattern of the retina on the backside of the eye or of the eyeball. Number 5 is iris scan. This is based on the colored portion of the eye that surrounds the pupil. The iris has unique patterns, rifts, colors, rings, coronas, and furrows. Number 6 is signature dynamics. This is based on electrical signals generated due to physical motion of the hand during signing a document. Number 7 is keyboard dynamics. This is based on electrical signals generated while the user types in the keys. That is what we call passphrase on the keyboard. Number 8 is voice print. This is based on human voice. Number 9 is facial scan. This is based on the different bone structures, nose ridges, eye winds, forehead sizes, and chin shapes of the face. Number 10 is handy topography. This is based on the different peaks, valleys, overall shape, and the curvature of the hand. Number 2 is passwords. This is the most common form of system identification and authentication mechanism. A password is a protected string of characters that is used to authenticate an individual. The following are some ways of managing password. Number 1, the password should be properly guaranteed, updated, and kept secret to provide an effective security. Number 2, password generators can be used to generate passwords that are uncomplicated, pronounceable, non-dictionary ones. Number 3, if the user chooses his or her passwords, the system should enforce certain password requirements like insisting to use special characters, number of characters, case sensitivity, amongst the others. Number 4, password checkers can be used to check the strength of the password by trying to break into the system. Number 5, passwords should be encrypted and hashed. Number 6 is password aging should be implemented. The number of log-on attempts should be limited. The password works as follows. The login program asks the user to type his name and password. The password is then immediately encrypted. The login program then sends the password file, which is a series of ASCII lines, one per user, until it finds the line containing the user's login name. If the encrypted password contained in this line matches the encrypted password just computed, the login is permitted, otherwise it is refused. Number 3, is use of user card, badge, or key. This is a method of checking to see if the user has some item, normally a plastic card with a magnetic stripe on it. The card is inserted into the terminal, which then checks to see whose card it is. This method can be combined with a password so that a user can only log in if he or she has the card and knows the password. User need to punch card in card slot or enter key generated by key generator in option provided by the operating system to log in into the system. This card or this information does not have to be kept secret. It should not be forgettable or copyable. It can be stolen, but the owner should know if it is. Number 4 is what we call signature analysis. The user signs his or her name with a special pen connected to the terminal, and the computer compares it to a known specimen that is stored online. Even better, compare the pen emotions made while writing it. Let's now look or focus on authorization. Authorization is the method of controlling the access of objects by the subject. For example, a user cannot delete a particular file after logging into the system. It involves the act of defining access rights for subjects. An authorization policy specifies the operations that the subjects are allowed to execute within a system. This is the process of determining which principals are allowed to perform which operations on which objects. This can be performed through the use of access control lists, which we abbreviate as ACLs. This is a technique which consists of associating with each object an ordered list containing all the domains that may access the object and how. Most modern operating systems implement authorization policies as formal sets of permissions that are variations or extensions of 3 basic types of access. Number 1 is read. The subject can read the file contents and list the directory contents. Number 2 is write. The subject can change the contents of a file. Number 3 is execute. If the file is a program, the subject can cause the program to be ran. These rights and permissions are implemented directly in systems based on discretionary access control, that is DAC, and mandatory access control, MAC. Number 4 is firewalling. Firewalls are devices or sometimes software that sit on the border between 2 security domains and monitor or log activity between them, sometimes restricting the traffic that can pass between them based on certain criteria. A firewall is used to separate trusted and untrusted systems. A firewall is a computer or router that sits between the trusted and the untrusted. It limits network access between the 2 security domains and monitors and locks all connections. A firewall, therefore, may need to allow HTTP to pass. firewalls themselves need to be resistant to attacks and unfortunately have several vulnerabilities. These include tunneling, which involves encapsulating forbidden traffic inside of packets that are allowed. Number two is denial of service attacks addressed at the firewall itself. Number three is spoofing, in which an authorized host sends packets to the firewall, which or with the return address of an authorized host. In addition to the common firewalls protecting a company internal network from the outside world, there are also some specialized forms of firewalls that have been recently developed. A personal firewall is a software layer that protects an individual computer. It may be part of the operating system or a separate software package. An application proxy firewall understands that the protocols of a particular service and acts as a stand-in and relay for the particular service. I repeat, an application proxy firewall understands the protocols of a particular service and acts as a standard or as a stand-in and relay for the particular service. For example, SMTP proxy firewall would accept SMTP requests from the outside world, examine them for security concerns, and forward only the safe ones on the real SMTP server behind the firewall. XML firewalls examine XML packets only and reject ill-formed packets. Similar firewalls exist for other specific protocols. System call firewalls guard the boundary between the user mode and the system mode and reject any system calls that violate security policies. Number 5 is auditing. These are tools used to trace which clients access to what and which way. Although auditing does not really provide any protection against security threats, audit logs can be extremely useful for the analysis of a security breach and subsequently taking measures against the intruders. For this reason, attackers are generally keen not to leave any traces that could eventually lead to exposing their identity. In this case, or in this sense, logging accesses makes attacking sometimes a riskier business. Let's now focus on access control verification. Access controls are security features that control how users and systems communicate and interact with other systems and resources. Access is the flow of information between a subject and a resource. A subject is an active entity that requests access to a resource or the data within a resource. For example, user, program, process, etc. A resource is an entity that contains the information. For example, computer, database, file, program, printer, etc. Access controls give organizations the ability to control, restrict, monitor, and protect resource availability, integrity, and confidentiality. Therefore, the access control is just another name for compartmentalization of resources. It is useful to group general problems involved in making certain that the files are not read or modified by unauthorized personnel or by less privileged programs running on the operating system. There are two major aspects of access control. These are, number one, access control policies. The access control policy is defined as which data is to be protected from whom. In simplest form, this is a matrix in which rows define users and columns define files or directories. If value of a cell in this matrix is 0, the access to a particular file or directory by a particular user is prohibited. Higher value define what type of access is allowed, whether read-only, read-write, execute, etc. Of course, this simple model is unrealistic in file systems with thousands or millions of files and directories. In this case, inheritance mechanisms are usually defined to simplify it. Number two is access control mechanisms. The manner by which the operating system enforces the access control policy is very important. An access enforcement mechanism authorizes requests, for example, system calls, from multiple subjects, for example, users, processes, etc., to perform operations such as read, write, etc., on objects such as files, sockets, etc. In other words, an access enforcement mechanism authorizes requests from multiple subjects to perform operations on objects. Therefore, an access enforcement is a combination of authentication and authorization to control access. Some part of the system must be responsible for enforcing access controls and protecting authentication and authorization information. In computer security, general access control includes identification, authorization, authentication, access approval, and audit. That is, in computer security, general access control includes identification, authorization, authentication, access approval, and audit. The authentication and access control are often combined into a single operation so that access is approved based on successful authentication or based on an anonymous access token. Authentication methods and tokens include passwords, biometric scans, physical keys, electronic keys and devices, hidden paths, social barriers, and monitoring by humans and automated systems. Access approval is the function that actually grants or rejects access during operations. During access approval, the system compares the formal representation of the authorization policy with the access request to determine whether the request shall be granted or rejected. Moreover, the access evaluation can be done online or ongoing. An access control model is a framework that dictates how subjects access objects. It uses access control technologies and security mechanisms to enforce the rules and objectives of the model. These models are sometimes categorized as either discretionary or non-discretionary. There are three most widely recognized models. These are discretionary access control, DAC, mandatory access control, MAC, and non-discretionary or role-based access control, RBAC. What is discretionary access control? This is a policy determined by the owner of an object. The owner decides who is allowed to access the object and what privileges they have. Therefore, the control of access is based on the discretion, that is the wish, of the owner. Two important concepts in DAC are: number one, the file and data ownership. Every object in the system has an owner. In most DAC systems, each object's initial owner is the subject that caused it to be created. The access policy for an object is determined by its owner. Number two is access rights and permissions. These are the controls that an owner can assign to other subjects for specific resources. The most common implementation of DAC is through ACLs, which are dictated and set by the owners and enforced by the operating systems. Most domains have no access at all to most objects, and so storing a very large, mostly empty matrix is a waste of disk space. Two methods that are practical, however, are storing the matrix by rows or by columns, and then storing only the non-empty elements. The two approaches are surprisingly different. The first technique consists of associating with each object an ordered list containing all the domains that may access the object and how. This list is called the Access Control List, or ACL. The Access Control List contains a list of which subjects and their processes may access the object and in which ways. There is one ACL for each object. Each list is traditionally maintained and access checked by the kernel, although it could be feasible for objects to maintain and constrain their own access. But remember that most objects are passive. ACLs typically lists valid access modes by individual users. The owner of an object may or may not have permission to modify the ACL of the object itself. Searching an access control list is undertaken until a match of the requesting user and access mode is located. Default conditions considered unwise may be supported using open worldicons or specific default access elements at the tail of each ACL. The implementations that support extended ACLs use the following strategy. Number one, the owner class and other class entries in the 9-bit permission field have the same meaning as in the minimal ACL case. Number two, the group class entry specifies the permissions for the owner group for this file. These permissions represent the maximum permissions that can be assigned to named users or named groups other than the owning user. In this latter role, the group class entry functions as a mask. In this latter role, the group class entry functions as a mask. Number three, additional named users and named groups may be associated with a file, each with a 3-bit permission field. The permissions listed for a named user or named group are compared to the mask field. Any permission for the named user or named group that is not present in the mask field is disallowed. When a process requests access to a file system object, two steps are performed. These are: number one, select the ACL entry that most closely matches the requesting process. The ACL entries are looked at in the following order: owner, named users, that is owning or named groups, and the others. Only a single entry determines access. Step number two is checking if the matching entry contains sufficient permissions. A process can be a member in more than one group, so more than one group entry can match. If any of these matching group entries contain the requested permissions, one that contains the requested permission is picked. The result is the same no matter which entry is picked. If none of the matching group entries contains the requested permissions, access will be denied no matter which entry is picked. The DAC systems grant or deny access based on the identity of the subject. The identity can be user identity or a group identity, that is identity-based access control. What is mandatory access control, MAC? This refers to allowing access to a resource if and only if rules exist that allow a given user to access the resource. It is difficult to manage, but its use is usually justified when used to protect highly sensitive information, such as certain government and military information. Management is often simplified over what can be required if the information can be protected using hierarchical access control or by implementing sensitivity labels. This model is therefore very structured and strict and is based on a security label, also known as sensitivity label, attached to all objects. The subjects are given security clearance by classifying the subjects as secret, top secret, confidential, etc., and the objects are also classified similarly. The clearance and the classification data is stored in the security labels, which are bound to the specific subject and object. When the system makes a decision about fulfilling a request to access an object, it is based on the clearance of the subject, the classification of the object, and the security policy of the system. This model is used and is suitable for military systems where classification and confidentiality is of most importance. Security label or security labels are made up of a classification and the categories where classification indicates the security level and the categories enforced need to know the rules. What makes the method mandatory is the use of either rules or sensitivity labels. What are sensitivity labels? In such a system, subjects and objects must have labels assigned to them. A subject's sensitivity label specifies its level of trust. An object's sensitivity label specifies the level of trust required for access. In order to access a given object, the subject must have a sensitivity level or a sensitivity level equal to or higher than the requested object. Number two is data import and export. Controlling the import of information from other systems and export it to other systems, including printers, is a critical function of these systems, which must ensure that the sensitivity labels are properly maintained and implemented so that the sensitive information is appropriately protected at all times. Two methods are commonly used for applying mandatory access control. The first one is rule-based or label-based access control. This type of control further defines specific conditions for access to a requested object. A mandatory access control system implements a simple form of rule-based access control to determine whether access should be granted or denied by matching. An object's sensitivity label. Number two, a subject's sensitivity label. Number two is lattice-based access control. This can be used for complex access control decisions involving multiple objects and or subjects. A lattice model is a mathematical structure that defines greatest lower bound and least upper bound values for a pair of elements, such as a subject and an object. Let's now look at non-discretionary or role-based access control. This is an access policy that is determined by the system and not by the owner. The role-based access control is used in commercial applications and also in military systems where multi-level security requirements may also exist. The RBAC differs from DAC in that DAC allows users to control access to their resources, while in RBAC, access is controlled at the system level outside of the user's control. Although role-based access control is non-discretionary, it can be distinguished from mandatory access control primarily in the way permissions are handled. The MAC controls read and write permissions based on a user's clearance level and additional levels. The role-based access control collections or controls collections of permissions that may include complex operations such as e-commerce transaction, or maybe as simple as read or write. A role in role-based access control can be viewed as a set of permissions. Three primary rules are defined for RBAC. These are, number one is role assignment. A subject can execute a transaction only if the subject has selected or been assigned a suitable role. Number two is role authorization. A subject's active role must be authorized for the subject. With rule 1 above, that is role assignment, this rule ensures that users can take on only the roles for which they are authorized. Number three is transaction authorization. A subject can execute a transaction only if the transaction is authorized for the subject's active role. With rules 1 and 2, this rule ensures that users can execute only transactions for which they are authorized. Additional constraints may be applied as well, and the rules can be combined in a hierarchy where higher level roles subsume permissions owned by lower level sub-roles. Other types of access controls include 1. Intent-based access control, IBAC. This is an access control system that detects the intention of the user requesting access by answering the question why access is being requested, as opposed to current access control systems that asks who is requesting access. IBAC is designed to prevent the insider threat as opposed to the current access control systems that are designed to prevent the outsider threat. IBAC is a risk-based access control that assesses risks of access based on the detected intent and the motivation level towards executing that intent. Number 2 is emotion-based access control, EBAC. This is an access control system that detects the emotion of the user requesting access in order to form an access decision. This form of access control adds the sensibility aspect to access control systems to further analyze the risk of granting an authorized user access. A user who has a high level of anger and might cause damage if granted access, as well as denying a malicious authorized user access, can be useful. Granting a non-authorized user who have good intentions of access can be useful as well. For example, granting firefighters access to a facility in order to suppress damage. Number 3 is attribute-based access control, ABAC. Access is granted not based on the rights of the subject associated with a user after authentication, but it's based on attributes of the user. The user has to prove so-called claims about his or her attributes to the access control engine. An attribute-based access control policy specifies which claims need to be satisfied in order to grant access to an object. Number 4 is break glass access control models. Traditionally, access has the purpose of restricting access. Thus, most access control models follow the default deny principle. That is, if a specific access request is not explicitly allowed, it will be denied. This behavior might conflict with the regular operations of a system. In certain situations, humans are willing to take the risk that might be involved in violating an access control policy if the potential benefit that can be achieved outweighs this risk. This need is especially visible in the healthcare domain, where a denied access to patient records can cause the death of a patient. Break glass, also called break the glass, try to mitigate this by allowing users to override access control decision. Number 5 is host-based access control, HBAC. This access control defines which users or user groups can access specified hosts or hosting groups by using specified services or services in a service group. For example, you can limit access to a specified system in your domain to members of a certain specific user group. Number 2, you can allow only a specific service to be used to access the systems in your domain. The administrator configures host-based access control by using a set of allowing rules named as HBAC rules. For centralized and simplified access control management, you can apply HBAC rules to whole user, host, or service groups instead of individual users, hosts, or services. The following are the main access control challenges. Number 1, various types of users need different levels of access. For example, internal users, contractors, outsiders, partners, amongst the others. Number two, resources have different classification levels. For example, confidential, internal use only, private, public, etc. Number three, diversity or diverse identity data must be kept on different types of users. For example, credentials, personal data, contact information, work-related data, digital certificates, cognitive passwords, amongst the others. Number four, the corporate environment is continually changing. Business environment needs, or this includes business environmental needs, or environment needs, resource access needs, employee roles, actual employees, amongst others. The following are the main access control principles. Number one is the principle of least privilege. This principle states that if nothing has been specifically configured for an individual or the groups he or she belongs to, the user should not be able to access that resource. That is default no access. Number two is separation of duties. Separating any conflicting areas of responsibility so as to reduce opportunities for unauthorized or unintentional modification or misuse of organizational assets and or information. Number three is needed to know. It is based on the concept that individuals should be given access only to the information that they absolutely require in order to perform their job duties. The criteria for providing access to an object include: number one, roles; number two, groups; number three, location; number four, time; number five, transaction type. The following are some of the access control practices. Number one, deny access to systems by undefined users or anonymous accounts. Number two, limit and monitor the usage of administrator and other powerful accounts. Number three, suspend or delay access capability after a specific number of unsuccessful log-on attempts. Number four, remove obsolete user accounts as soon as the user leaves the company. Number five, suspend inactive accounts after 30 to 60 days. Number six, enforce strict access criteria. Number seven, enforce the need to know and least privilege practices. Number eight, disable unneeded system features, services, and ports. Number nine, replace default password settings on accounts. Number 10, limit and monitor global access rules. Number 11, ensure that log-on IDs are non-descriptive of job function. Number 12, remove the redundant resource rules from accounts and group memberships. Number 12, remove redundant user IDs, accounts, and role-based accounts from resource access lists. Number 13, enforce password rotation. Number 14, enforce password requirements such as length, contents, lifetime, distribution, storage, and transmission. Number 15, audit system and user events and actions and review reports periodically. Number 16, protect audit logs. Access controls can be implemented at various layers of a network and individual systems. The access controls can be classified into 3 layers or categories, each category having different access control mechanisms that can be carried out manually or automatically. Let's look at administrative controls, physical controls, technical or logical controls. I repeat, the access controls can be classified into 3 layers or categories, each category having different access control mechanisms that can be carried out manually or automatically. These layers or categories include administrative controls, the physical controls, and technical or logical controls. Each of the control or each of the access control categories, that is administrative, physical, and technical, work at different levels, each at a different level of granularity, and perform different functionalities based on the type. The different types of access control in this case are, number 1, preventative. These avoid undesirable events from occurring. Detective. These identify undesirable events that have already occurred. Corrective. These entail correcting undesirable events that have occurred. Deterrent. These discourage security violations. Recovery. These restore resources and capabilities. Compensative. These provide alternatives to other controls. The access control administration can be done in 2 ways. Number 1 is centralized access control. Here, one entity, for example, a department or an individual, is responsible for overseeing access to all corporate resources. This type of administration provides a consistent and uniform method of controlling users' access rights. Number 2 is decentralized access control. A decentralized access control administration method gives control of access to the people closer to the resources. In this approach, it is often the functional manager who assigns access control rights to employees. Let's now look at audit trail or audit log. An audit trail is a series of records of computer events about an operating system, an application, or user activities. It is a security-relevant chronological record set of records and or destination and source of records that provide documentary evidence of the sequence of activities that have affected any time a specific operation, procedure, or event. Audit records typically result from activities such as financial transactions, scientific research, and healthcare data transactions, or communications by individual people, systems, accounts, or other entities. Audit trails maintain a record of system activity both by system and application processes and by user activity of systems and applications. In conjunction with appropriate tools and procedures, audit trails can assist in detecting security violations, performance problems, and flaws in applications. A computer system may have several audit trails, each devoted to a particular type of activity. Auditing is a review and analysis of management, operational, and technical controls. The process that creates an audit trail is typically required to always run in a privileged mode so that it can access and supervise all actions from all users. A normal user should not be allowed to stop or change it. Furthermore, for the same reason, trail file or database table with a trail should not be accessible to normal users. Another way of handling this issue is through the use of a role-based security model in the software. The software can operate with the closed-looped controls or as a closed system as required by many companies when using audit trail functionality. Accountability is the method of tracking and logging the subject's actions on the objects, while auditing is an activity where the user's or subject's actions on the objects are monitored in order to verify that the sensitivity policies are enforced and can be used as an investigation tool. Therefore, accountability uses such system components as audit trails, that is records, and logs to associate a subject with its actions. The information recorded should be sufficient to map the subject to a controlling user. Audit trails and logs are important for, number one, detecting security violations. Number two, recreating security incidents. If no one is regularly viewing your logs and they are not maintained in a secure and consistent manner, they may not be admissible as evidence. Many systems can generate automated reports based on certain predefined criteria or thresholds known as clipping levels. For example, a clipping level may be set to generate a report for the following. Number one, more than 3 failed log-on attempts in a given period. Number two, any attempt to use a disabled user account. These reports help a system administrator or security administrator to more easily identify possible break-in attempts. The following are some advantages of auditing. Number one, to track unauthorized activities performed by individuals. Number two, detect intrusion. Number three, reconstruct events and system conditions. Number four, provide legal resource material and produce problem reports. The following is a list of events that should be audited. Number one is system level events. This includes system performance, log-on attempts, whether successful or unsuccessful, log-in or log-on ID, date and time of each log-on attempt, the logouts of users and terminals, use of administration utilities, devices used, the functions performed, the requests to alter configuration files. Number two is application level events. These include error messages, the files opened and closed, modifications of files, security violations within application. Number 3 is user-level events. These include identification and authentication attempts, the files, services, and resources used, the commands initiated, security violations. Audit trails can be reviewed manually or through automated means. The following are the main types of audit reviews. Number 1 is event-oriented. These are done as and when an event occurs. Number 2 is periodic. These are done periodically to assess the health of the system. Number 3 is real-time. These are done with the help of automated tools as and when the audit information gets created. The audit trail analysis tools. These tools helps in reducing or filtering the audit log information that is not necessarily and provides only those information necessary for auditing. I repeat, the audit trail analysis tools are those tools which help in reducing or filtering the audit log information that is not necessary, and it provides only that information which is necessary for auditing. These types of audit trail analysis tools are: 1 is audit reduction tools. These tools reduces the amount of information within an audit log, discuss mundane tasks information, and records system performance, security, and user functionality information that are necessary for auditing. Number 2 is variance detection tools. These tools monitor computer and resource usage trends and detect variations that are unusual or that entail unusual activities. For example, an employee logging into the machine during odd hours. Number 3 is attack signature detection. These tools pulse the audit logs based on some predefined patterns in the database. If a pattern matches any of the pattern or signature in the database, it indicates that an attack has taken place or is in progress. Number 4 is keystroke monitoring. The audit trails can provide a means to help accomplish several security-related objectives, including individual accountability, reconstruction of events, that is, actions that happen on a computer system, intrusion detection, and problem analysis. Then we have individual accountability. Audit trails are a technical mechanism that help managers maintain individual accountability. By advising users that they are personally accountable for their actions, which are tracked by an audit trail that logs user activities, managers can help promote proper user behavior. Users are less likely to attempt to circumvent security policy if they know that their actions will be recorded in an audit log. Audit trails work in concert with logical access controls, which restrict use of system resources. Granting users access to particular resources usually means that they need that access to accomplish their job. Authorized access, of course, can be misused, which is where audit trail analysis is useful. While users cannot be prevented from using resources to which they have legitimate access authorization, audit trail analysis is used to examine their actions. A reconstruction of events. The audit trails can be used to reconstruct events after a problem has occurred. The damage can be more easily assessed by reviewing audit trails of system activity to pinpoint how, when, and why normal operations ceased. The audit trail analysis can often distinguish between operator-induced errors, during which the system may have performed exactly as instructed, or system-created errors. For example, those arising from a poorly tested piece of replacement code. Knowledge of the conditions that existed at the time of, for example, a system crash can be useful in avoiding future outages. Additionally, if a technical problem occurs, for example, the corruption of a data file, audit trails can aid in the recovery process. For example, by using the record of changes made to reconstruct the file. Intrusion detection. Intrusion detection refers to the process of identifying attempts to penetrate a system and gain unauthorized access. If audit trails have been designed and implemented to record appropriate information, they can assist in intrusion detection. Although normally thought of as a real-time effort, intrusions can be detected in real time by examining audit records as they are created, or through the use of other kinds of warning flags or notices, or after the fact, for example, by examining audit records in a batch process. Real-time intrusion detection is primarily aimed at outsiders attempting to gain unauthorized access to the system. It may also be used to detect changes in the system's performance indicative of, for example, a virus or worm attack, forms of malicious code. There may be difficulties in implementing real-time auditing, including unacceptable system performance. After the fact identification may indicate that unauthorized access was attempted or was successful. Attention can then be given to damage assessment or reviewing controls that were attacked. Problem analysis. The audit trails may also be used as online tools to help identify problems other than intrusions as they occur. This is often referred to as real-time auditing or monitoring. If a system or application is deemed to be critical to an organization's business or mission, real-time auditing may be implemented to monitor the status of these processes, although, as noted above, there can be difficulties with real-time analysis. An analysis of the audit trails may be able to verify that the system operated normally. That is, that an error may have resulted from operator error or opposed to a system-originated error. Such use of audit trails may be complemented by system performance logs. For example, a significant increase in the use of system resources, for example, disk file space or outgoing modem use, could indicate a security problem. An audit trail should include sufficient information to establish what events occurred and who or what caused them. In general, an event record should specify when the event occurred, the user ID associated with the event, the program or command used to initiate the event, and the result. Date and time can help determine if the user was a masquerader or the actual person specified. Keystroke monitoring. Keystroke monitoring is the process used to view or record both the keystrokes entered by a computer user and the computer's response during an interactive session. Keystroke monitoring is usually considered a special case of audit trails. For example, or examples of keystroke monitoring would include viewing characters as they are typed by users, reading users' electronic mail, and viewing other recorded information typed by users. System audit records are generally used to monitor and fine-tune system performance. Application audit trails may be used to discern flaws in applications or violations of security policy committed within an application. Audit or user audit records are generally used to hold individuals accountable for their actions. An analysis of user audit records may expose a variety of security violations, which might range from simple browsing to attempts to plant Trojan horses or gain unauthorized privileges. The system itself enforces certain aspects of policy, particularly system-specific policy, such as access to files and access to the system itself. Monitoring the alteration of systems configuration files that implement the policy is important. If special accesses, for example, security administrator access, have to be based or have to be used to alter configuration files, the system should generate audit records whenever these accesses are made. Sometimes a finer level of detail that system audit trails is required. Application audit trails can provide this greater level of recorded detail. If an application is critical, it can be desirable to record not only who invoked the application, but certain details specific to each use. A user audit trail monitors and logs user activity in a system or application by recording events initiated by the user. For example, access of a file, record, or field, or use of a modem. Flexibility is a critical feature of audit trails. Ideally, from a security point of view, a system administrator would have the ability to monitor all system and user activity, but could choose to log only certain functions at the system level and within certain applications. The decision of how much to log and how much to review should be a function of application or data sensitivity and should be decided by each functional manager or application owner with guidance from the system administrator and the computer security manager or officer weighing the costs and benefits of the logging. Audit logging can have privacy implications. Users should be aware of applicable privacy laws or privacy laws, regulations, and policies that may apply in such situations. The following are some types of audit trails. Number one is system-level audit trails. If a system-level audit capability exists, the audit trail should capture at a minimum any attempt to log on, whether successful or unsuccessful, the log on ID, date and time of each log on attempt, the date and time of each log off, the devices used, and the functions performed once logged on. For example, the applications that the user tried successfully or unsuccessfully to invoke. System-level logging also typically includes information that is not specifically security-related, such as system operations, cost accounting changes, and network performance. Number 2 is application-level audit trails. System-level audit trails may not be able to track and log events within applications, or may not be able to provide the level of detail needed by application or data owners, the system administrator, or the computer security manager. In general, application-level audit trails monitor and log user activities, including data files opened and closed, specific actions such as reading, editing, and deleting records or fields, and printing reports. Some applications may be sensitive enough from a data availability, confidentiality, and or integrity perspective that a before and after picture of each modified record or the data elements changed within a record should be captured by the audit trail. Number 3 is user audit trails. User audit trails can usually log all commands directly initiated by the user or identification and authentication attempts and the files and resources accessed. It is most useful if options and parameters are also recorded from commands. It is much more useful to know that a user tried to delete a log files or a log file, for example, to hide unauthorized actions, than to know the user merely issued the delete command, possibly for a personal data file. Audit trail data requires protection since the data should be available for use when needed and is not useful if it is not accurate. Also, the best planned and implemented audit trail is of limited value without timely review of the logged data. Audit trails may be reviewed periodically as needed, often triggered by occurrence of a security event, automatically in real time or in some combination of these. System managers and administrators, with guidance from computer security personnel, should determine how long audit trail data will be maintained, either on the system or in archive files. Access to online audit logs should be strictly controlled. Computer security managers and system administrators or managers should have access for review purposes. However, security and or administration personnel who maintain logical access functions may have no need for access to audit logs. It is particularly important to ensure that the integrity of audit trail data against modification. I repeat, it is particularly important to ensure the integrity of audit trail data against modification. One way to do this is to use digital signatures, and another way is to use the right one's devices. The audit trail files need to be protected since, for example, intruders may try to cover their tracks by modifying audit trail records. Audit trail records should be protected by a strong access control to help prevent unauthorized access. The integrity of audit trail information may be particularly important with legal issues or when legal issues arise, such as when audit trails are used as legal evidence. This may, for example, require daily printing and signing of the logs. The questions of such legal issues should be directed to the cognizant legal counsel. The confidentiality of audit trail information may also be protected. For example, if the audit trail is recording information about users that may be disclosure sensitive, such as transaction data containing personal information, e.g. before and after records of modification to income data tax or income tax data. Strong access controls and encryption can be particularly effective in preserving confidentiality. Congratulations for viewing and listening to this video on file protection and security, which is part 6 of 6 in file management topic. You can listen to the other parts of file management topic from part 1 to part 5, as well as other videos in the field of computers or ICT from MLSwap ICT YouTube channel. In addition, you can access free life skills, motivational and inspirational resources from MLSwap Motivation YouTube channel. You can tap on subscribe button for each of these 2 channels for ease of access to the channel's content if you have not already subscribed. For any further correspondence, kindly write it to us through the email emilyswap@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening to me and be blessed.